is what I need you to understand, is that you're already a master manifester. No one needs to teach you to manifest. You actually don't need any more videos, any more coaches, any more programs. However, you clicked on this video because if that would seem to be the case, then why does life not look like heaven on earth for me? That's the question. So we're going to talk about an attention point that you can remove from this video. We're not going to be talking about adding in here today. And I thank you for co-creating this transmission with me of Divine Within. I am your host and divine embodiment coach, Lucian. And here's something that will help you, that I know will be of service to you. If you're fighting something, then you're affirming that it exists. I'm not talking about denying realities, because it actually still takes a lot of energy to resist something. Think about if you spend all your time, and many people do this psychologically, unconsciously, they spend all their time trying to keep the monster in the closet. And they spend it through maybe workaholism, maybe alcoholism, maybe doom scrolling, maybe jumping from partner to partner to partner. Every time I get broken up with, I'm back on the apps, whatever it might be. I eat too much chocolate, I watch too much porn, whatever it might be. We spend all this time trying to keep the monster in the closet. And the monster, what we're trying to avoid standardly, is loneliness, is worthlessness, is hopelessness, powerlessness. Those are usually the range of negative emotions that we're trying to keep in the closet. I don't want to have to sit with myself. That's why meditation can be so powerful. We spend all this time. So think about this: to resist something is actually to spend a lot of time and energy unconsciously pushing it away from you. I have to stand at this door all day, every day to make sure the monster doesn't come out. And again, the monster can be hopelessness, can be helplessness, can be, I don't know if people like me. It can be, which really is like a abandonment, rejection, sensitivity. You can allow it to be there, allow it to be in the room with you. It can be incredibly powerful, because if you don't spend all your time trying to manage a negative emotion from emerging, think about how much power you have just restored to your entire internal system. Think about that. If you're continuing to fight something, you are affirming its existence. Speaking with a client significantly younger than me, the post 9/11 generation, so they've grown up in really this kind of like dystopian. And I asked her what happiness was to her. How would she define that, to get a gauge of her internal landscape? And she said, how can I be happy when all of this stuff is going on? And you fill in the blank with all of this stuff, again, particularly through the lens of that generation. And not that any other generation has not had its own fair share, fine. The world's been ending since it started. So that's how I see things. But she, mentioned, situations X, Y, and Z in the political landscape, and the bombings and the war and COVID. And how could she, she's like, how could I realistically sit here and say I want to be a happy person? She's like, I might have moments of blah blah blah, but how is that even a fair thing for me to try to achieve? Which again, this is first session, so we had kind of a lot to sort through in terms of concepts there. But think about it this way: you can agree to be a part of the world that is the collective that appears to be, or you can be a part of the world that you decide is truthful for you. So it's a matter of what you agree to and accept. Because if you accept that war and famine and torture, malice, evil, lack, scarcity, if you agree that that's all that there is, that is what will continue to manifest in your life. And there is plenty of example for it on a neurological basis, neuropsychiatry, neuropsychology, whatever it might be. Your brain is going to find what it is looking for. Always. We have a bias that is going to point our attention in the direction of what we already believe to be true. And that's why a lot of the quote unquote I don't call it an awakening process. You call it whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. But the process of remembering that you are divine within starts with doing an audit of everything you already believe to be true. Because from ages 0 to 7, we're just sponges. We've internalized all of the world around us. And for most of us, what that internalization was not overwhelmingly positive. It was lack, it was fear, it was scarcity, it was all of the above. There's not enough money. There's not enough love. I remember growing up, one thing my parents said to me is, people suck. You can't trust anyone. Everyone's out for themselves. Okay, well, what does that child learn? They learn the world is a very unsafe place. That's not even talking about financial messages or messages about belonging or connection or anything about that. Just that line, people suck. You can't trust anyone. Okay, well then what is that child going to grow up to think? They're going to think the world is a very unsafe place. And there's plenty of evidence for that because everything is actually happening all at once. If we're talking about the holographic reality of things, or if we're talking about the dream and the simulation, or find just the mind of God being what we're living in and of and as, that you're the creator, you're the act of creation, and you are the created, you are all of it, experiencing itself through yourself. You're an individualized expression of God. Everything's possible. So if you see that the world is just one big hellscape, and you feel that, we might quite literally be living in, in and as incarnations of this type of a dystopian, it's terrible on the collective level, it's terrible on the individual level, you will find an abundance of evidence for that, because there is always an abundance of everything. That's the secret, is that there is an abundance of everything. But what are you tuning your attention to? This was a thought that I had. Think about how rich you actually are if we compare your current circumstances to 120 years ago. So I'm talking about food, grocery store that you don't have to plant. I mean, think about 120 years ago, would have been around, the beginning of the 20th century. What I'm imagining is that most of everything was still largely agricultural. You were still probably planting and growing your own food. Maybe even, depending on where you lived, slaughtering your own animals still. Outhouses were still the norm. Electricity, hit or miss, depending on maybe how much money your family had. And that, wealth was still largely generational. And I mean wealth, I mean just even if you fell into what would be the middle class, is really kind of more of an invention of post-World War II. So much has happened in these last 100 years. The fact that you can just go turn on a light. Now, I'm not saying you need to be grateful for the bare minimum in your life, but to look around and see that there's plenty of everything, to go outside and see there's plenty of fucking trees, there's plenty of air, clean air for you to breathe, there's plenty of clean water, there's plenty of everything. But what have you agreed to in your reality, and what do you accept to be true? Because our agreements are not thoughts that we think once. You can try to tell yourself, I am loved, I am lucky, life is plentiful, life is bountiful, everything is great, my life is getting better and better every single day, everything I desire, my heaven on earth is here now. You can say all of those things to yourself as affirmations, and I love affirmations, but if you don't actually agree to them, and what I'm talking about in terms of agreements is, that's why they work together, is what do you accept to be certain in your reality? What are you certain of? What are you certain of? And I mean, and they cross interact. Whatever you're certain of is what you're going to agree with. Whatever you agree with on a consistent basis is going to be what you're certain of. It's just going to color your sight, because everything is happening all at once. So you could see any variation of this entire matrix depending on what you agree and what you accept, because it doesn't matter. That's what I'm saying. If we turn our lens to 120 years ago, and if we were to tune it back to now, I mean, imagine, let's just say you had to live in the year 1900 for a year. I'm talking about an extended period of time, 6 months. You would come back and be so grateful you don't have to pump well water every day. You would be so freaking grateful you can just drive your car to go pick up your meat. That you don't have to barter or trade with freaking, Farmer Joe down the street. You got to keep a good relationship with him, even though he's an asshole, so you can get your meat. You would be so thankful you could just turn on a light. So it's not about being grateful for scraps. It's realizing there are no scraps, that everything has been given to you, but it's a matter of tuning your sight to that. So, really back in, it's kind of wrapped around, but, back to the original point, is that if you're fighting against something, you're affirming that it's there. If you're fighting against a worldview where, for instance, you're not respected, or you feel like, your boss doesn't respect you, to fight against that, and maybe to try to change the institution, to get people to rally along, and to protest and try to get the rules changed, and all of this other stuff. What you're affirming is that I am a victim, I am in the place of the disempowered, and through all of these different things, I'm trying to force the external reality to validate the fact that I am respected so that I can believe it internally. And that's why, and this might be a controversial view, that I don't think protests really do much if they're coming from the place of, we are the victimized, we are those who are lacking justice, and here we are all gathered together to try to force justice to be given to us. You claim the justice within yourself and in your space, and if you do gather in forms of two or more, it's because you are stating that the justice is already the case, that justice has already been given. I agree to only see justice, I only accept justice. This is my reality, and this is who I am. And sure, if you gather in two or more to affirm that, that's much more powerful than we are the victimized and we're going to try to force the system to give us justice. If you're fighting against something, like if I'm sitting here fighting against this enemy, I have to agree and accept that an enemy exists. So, I'm getting in my jabs and my slogs, and I'm getting hit, and I'm bloody and I'm missing teeth, thinking that, okay, eventually I'm going to box this enemy out. I'm still in engagement with the enemy. I'm still in discourse with the enemy. That's how I learned this, in a very different paradigm, different kind of domain of life. But you really know a relationship is over when you're done fighting about whatever the constant fights are. And this could be a friendship. It probably applies more in intimate relationships, but when you're always fighting and nipping at somebody, and they're always fighting and nipping at you, and you find yourself in the same conversations about, where to put your socks, or who does more cleaning, or all this other stuff, you're done with the relationship when you just stop, when you're just done. You're like, what, I'm not even gonna. The end of the relationship doesn't look like constant fights. It looks like numbness. And I wouldn't even say numbness, because, numbness can actually be a lot of emotions occurring at once that are unprocessed and now indistinguishable from each other. But the end of it is when you just don't fucking care. You're like, what, I'm done. I'm done. I'm not gonna argue with you, because the fight with somebody is, there's actually still a great deal of energy exchange happening there. If I have to fight my anxiety, I'm jumping around, but I'm making examples of this. If I have to fight my anxiety, that's me agreeing. There's a difference between fighting and medicating anxiety, and affirming, living, agreeing, and accepting peace and stillness within. Those are totally different things. They might look the same, but they're totally different things. You don't need to fight against anything. You affirm your place from within, and it will take some time, especially if you've been living in a pattern. If you have this repetitious thought that's playing on autopilot, your job then at that point in time is to catch that autopilot and redirect your attention that that's not what I agree with, and that's not what I accept. But if you're fighting against something, if you're slogging against this enemy, you have to agree that the enemy is there. That doesn't mean then ignore your reality, but you don't have to agree with it. You can acknowledge the presence of something and not agree that that is the truth of your reality. Again, those are separate things. It's not about like just ignore it and act like it's not there. Certain things probably you just need to remove your attention from it. Absolutely. But if there's certain things that you have to deal with on a structural level or on a logistical level, fine, but don't accept that as the nature of your truth. It is something like a cloud that is just passing by. Is a passing emotion. It is a passing circumstance. It's transient. It's on its way out. I like to see things that I don't like to deal with. It's even like it had to come up to the surface so that it could be released. And that's how you deal with emotion as well. If you're standing at that door thinking like, no, I absolutely cannot deal with the unworthiness that comes with feeling like I'm alone and undesired, let it out of the closet. Let it breathe. Sit with it. Turn your attention inward to that. Close your eyes. Turn off all stimuli and be with that emotion. You'll find that all of the years you spent doing all this, and I know this from experience, doing all this to keep it in the closet, sit with that for 20 minutes. You'll find that it leaves you. And I'm not saying you'll never experience that emotion again. I'm saying you'll stop having to organize your whole day around how much time I can spend with my hands at the door of the closet to make sure the monster doesn't get out. And I hope you understand what I'm saying there. How many things do we do to avoid? I've worked with plenty of workaholics that they'll spend 80, 100 hours a week accomplishing a task, working up the ladder, whatever it might be. And it has nothing to do with what they're accomplishing. It has everything to do with, I have to stand at this door to make sure the unworthiness monster doesn't ever find me. I miss out on time with my family and my friends, and I don't take vacations. I don't rest. I don't sleep. I hardly eat because I have to stand at this door. And the way that I stand at the door is I work lots of hours. It doesn't really matter. We do a myriad of things to stand at the door, to resist the emotion. So, key takeaways here is if you can accept unpleasant emotional experiences as they come up, you don't have to agree to them. You don't have to cling to them. They don't have to mean anything. Although there is information stored in there about habitual thoughts that might be creating such intense negative emotional experiences. But even in the moment, you don't have to. If you could just turn your attention inwardly, to close your eyes and to allow it to be without judgment, you will see that it dissipates. And another practical application of that we discussed here today, wrapping up, would be if you're fighting something, you're affirming its existence. So they're really two sides of the same thing. And if you stop spending your time fighting things that you don't want, and you allow negative emotions to come up and be a part of you, and you sit with them without judgment, without clinging, without trying to prevent them, without doing anything with them, you'll find that you actually free up a lot more space to tune your attention to the fruit of your desire, to the being of your desire, as the God that you are, as an individualized expression of the all that is, because all of your attention now is not consumed with negativity, with realities that do not match the fulfillment that you seek, but they are fulfillments.